I would say that being a CISO is probably one of the best kept secrets of the Air Force, simply because you are in it. And he was like, hey, I heard the news. You got C-130s. How pumped are you? And I was like, Caleb, I'm devastated. And he was like, why? He was like, your life is about to get so amazing.
But anybody listening, it's like, okay, well, you never know. Like, something that you're not considering could end up being the greatest thing.
For sure. I had a blast. I thought it was kind of like being at summer camp. That allows them to cross-train to a rated position. So rated meaning pilot, combat systems officers, ABM, or RPA, remotely piloted aircraft. Can refer to being a navigator, a weapons systems officer, or an electronic warfare officer.
Okay.
So you will start combat systems officers training as a cohort. It means you get to be the first one to do it.
Or, yeah, you could be the first one.
Yeah, it means you get to pave the way for the future females.
So welcome, everybody. Career Insights, episode 13. Today we have Michelle. She is in the U.S. Air Force, and she is a combat systems officer on a C-130 airplane, and we're going to talk to her about her job. How you doing, Michelle?
Good. How are you, Eric?
I'm doing all right. How you feeling?
I'm excited.
You had your first kids CrossFit class. How did that go?
It was good. Those kids, they have a lot more energy than I do, but it's always a lot of fun. They get excited to be outside, to be doing activities, so it keeps me going.
Yeah. How long, or let's go back a little bit. Where'd you grow up at?
So I spent most of my childhood in Hampton, Virginia. I kind of pause when I say that because my dad was in the Air Force. So my dad was a maintenance officer. He served in the Air Force for 27 years.
Wow.
So kind of when I think about why I decided to serve, that was a huge reason why.
Yeah.
Having a family member in the military, being accustomed to that lifestyle, seeing the opportunities it gave my dad that he wouldn't have had.
Yeah.
I kind of realized this is something that I want to be a part of. I couldn't imagine my life without being in the military. So
You traveled around quite a bit then?
we did. We moved 5 times as a child, and then my dad was stationed in Hampton, Virginia. That's where I spent most of my middle school and high school years, and that's what I consider home now.
What base? Like, what did they have there at that base?
So we were stationed at Langley Air Force Base, which is currently home to the F-22 Raptors. Yep, and previously the home to the F-15.
Nice.
Yeah.
So was it F-15s back then?
No, it was still F-22s coming online.
Well,
yeah.
that would be really cool.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's a sweet plane.
Yeah.
So where'd you go to college at?
So my parents, when I was in high school, considering like what I wanted to study in college and where I wanted to go, I was extremely lucky to have parents that were super encouraging. They were just saying, we want you to go to a school and study without having to worry about the cost. So when I initially threw out the idea of going to do ROTC, they said, that's something you can do if you really want to, but like, do not worry about it from a cost perspective. So I ended up going to the University of Virginia, and I was just a normal student.
Wow.
So I didn't have any military commitments at the time, and I ended up majoring in biology because I had decided that I was thinking of doing something in the pre-health kind of realm. So I was thinking either med school, dental school, nursing, something to that effect.
Yeah, because you actually specialized in something before you went in the military. What was that again?
Yeah, so I actually ended up going to optometry school.
Okay.
And with that, I was commissioned under a health professions scholarship program. So essentially, I graduated from the University of Virginia with a bachelor's in biology. I applied to Ohio State University to their College of Optometry, and I ended up also getting a health professions scholarship. So essentially, what that does is I was able to go to Ohio State. The Air Force paid for my doctorate degree, and then I owed them time in service as an optometrist following my schooling.
So how did that work? Like, did you have to take like the AFOQT?
So essentially, what allowed me to apply for the health profession scholarship program was that I had a bachelor's degree and I had an acceptance into a professional program. And kind of like, I think what led me along this route was I was always interested in health and science. Like growing up, my favorite class was anatomy. I was interested in the body. But kind of when I was deciding exactly what health profession I wanted to do, coincidentally, my dad had a best friend in the Air Force who was an Air Force optometrist, and he was the one who pulled me aside and was like, hey, have you ever considered a career in optometry? This is a career that is a little bit more flexible, like you're not on call as much. And by the way, you can get this pretty amazing scholarship to have your schooling paid for. So optometry wasn't anything I had initially considered. I'd actually never even been to the optometrist growing up until I'd had this opportunity to not only talk to my dad's best friend, but shadow him in his clinic. And so that was kind of my initial entry into the military. So
it's interesting that you say that you had never thought of that, because that was the same for me becoming an attorney, as I had never considered that literally ever, up until the point where somebody suggested it. And I was like, oh, I thought about it for like a day or 2 days at most. And here I am. You know what I mean?
And it's interesting when you think about people like myself, where I've since transitioned from optometry to another career field. It's like, it is a little, I think maybe unrealistic to think when you're 17, you know what you want to do for the rest of your life. It's like you've maybe worked a fast food job and been a lifeguard, but that is kind of considered where you start to like pick a university, and you're picking a university based on what type of degree you're going to have or what kind of technical specialty. And so for me, when I entered the University of Virginia, most individuals were pre-health or pre-commerce. And so there wasn't really like a lot in between. And I think about other countries where they do like a gap year in between school, and just like maybe individuals need more time to kind of figure out like what would be something better suited for them. Because I think unfortunately we get a little bit like locked in or like tracked in at an early age, because we're just kind of going off of like what our parents tell us or other people's recommendations, but not having really experienced it ourselves.
Yeah. So the program that you went through, did it eventually lead to like you being commissioned in the military? Is that how that worked?
Yeah. So the health profession scholarships, those are unique because they are offered to all, like the name sounds, health professions. So dental, medical, optometry, physical therapy. And the crazy thing is, while you're in school, you have no military obligations. Wow. So your job is to be a full-time student and to graduate your doctoral program. And then upon graduating from those health profession scholarship programs, you're commissioned. In my case, I was commissioned as a captain in the United States Air Force. Okay. So it's also kind of crazy because like I was never a first or second lieutenant in the military. And those can be kind of formative years. You know, those are your years where you can kind of get away with things because people are like, oh, you're just a silly lieutenant. So it was a little bit surreal to graduate from school as a captain, go to my first assignment, and people look at you, they see your captain's bars, and they assume you've been in the military for 5 to 8 years, and you don't want to have to be the one to be like, this is my second month being active duty. So that is something unique to the medical and health professions.
Interesting. So did you go to OTS, Officer Training School, or?
It's analogous to OTS, but it's actually called Commissioned Officer Training. So you'll hear it referred to as COT. And at the time when I went through in 2015, it was a 5-week program. Okay. So it was abbreviated compared to OTS. I had a blast. I thought it was kind of like being at summer camp. But yeah, it's called COT.
Yeah, because I think there's, it's, if I remember, I've heard of people like in certain professions, like doctors, sometimes attorneys, if they want to go JAG, that they can be older and they can be way beyond the age where somebody would normally go in, and they can almost get like I don't know if it's a direct appointment, but basically they go to like an abbreviated officer training school, like what you were saying. And so that's pretty cool. And like, so somebody that's interested in something like that, where would you find that out at?
Yeah. So you will still contact a recruiting office, and you will want to tell them that you are currently in a professional degree program or you have graduated from one. So you're exactly right. Commissioned officer training, it's not just for medical. You will also see chaplains and JAGs. So judge advocate generals or like lawyers, attorneys will also attend. And so again, the incentive is to have those individuals already commissioned in the military prior to even going through any training. So it's a little weird because you are a captain and your instructors are also captains.
Interesting.
Yeah, but the intent is to incentivize individuals that have these advanced degrees to serve in the military. So oftentimes the military will credit any civilian experience that you have and allow you to enter the military at a higher rank. So sometimes you'll see surgeons, that type of thing, entering the military as majors and lieutenant colonels because they have civilian experience. And again, that is a way to incentivize them to serve and provide them a higher pay for their specialties.
Interesting. So when you say talk to a recruiter, would this be like an officer accessions office or?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yep. And so they may not necessarily have a health professions recruiter in that office, but they can put you in touch with a regional one. Because I would say the health professions accessions, that's a pretty niche group when it comes to recruiting.
I'd never even heard of that. Yeah.
So
that's super important. So what would you say? What did you call it again? Specifically what we just said?
The commissioned officer training. So commissioned officer training would be for anyone interested in a career regarding like chaplain, lawyer, or medical professions.
So if somebody is going that route, this is a possibility, but it's also a possibility for somebody that's already there.
Correct. Like you said, you can... I think each career field will have its own age restrictions, but if you're already a practicing lawyer, already a practicing doctor, you could talk to a recruiter. There may be programs out there that can help you pay off any loans you currently have, that type of thing. So again, these programs tend to like ebb and flow based on budgets, but you should definitely contact a recruiter to see what's available given where you're at.
So then you have an obligation.
Correct.
And how long is that obligation? And you're doing optometry, and that's eyes, right?
Correct. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah.
People are always like, oh, teeth. And I'm like, no, that's an orthodontist. But yeah, eyes, optometry. So I went through a 4-year optometry doctorate program. The Air Force paid for my last 3 years, and then I owed them 3 years time in service.
Okay.
Yeah. Which was pretty awesome. These programs
really
can be
good deal.
Expensive. They can be upwards of $50,000 to $100,000 a year. So
you go in as a captain, you have a 3-year obligation as an optometrist. And then so what happens at the end of the 3 years? Are like, you can keep going or you can get out or?
Correct. So you'll enter the military. You'll be assigned to your first duty location, and you'll have what's called an active duty service commitment. So that is legally the amount of time you're obligated to serve in the military to pay back the schooling that the Air Force paid for. And so for me, during my initial 3 years of service, I was stationed at Tyndall Air Force Base in Panama City, Florida. And then I was also stationed at Osan Air Base in South Korea.
Okay. At some point, you decide to change careers. And at what point is this in your military career?
So, as I stated, my first base, I was at Tyndall Air Force Base, which also is home to the F-22, or excuse me, was previously home to the F-22. This was in 2015. And so, again, being in that medical profession, there are some really unique things that I really enjoyed about my job. I loved that my patients trusted me. They knew I wasn't trying to make any type of money off of them. But there were things that I wanted more. I wanted to feel more connected to the mission.
Yeah.
It's really hard for medical and support personnel to feel like they're the tip of the spear, the ones out doing the thing. And so it wasn't until I had the opportunity to go over to the flight line, like meet F-22 pilots, see their simulator, like see the aircraft, where I was like, this is really cool. Like and I was kind of shocked at just how many medical personnel didn't know that much about the aircraft that we were here to support.
Wow. Yeah.
And I also had a friend coincidentally in my squadron who was an aerospace physiologist who was working on her private pilot license. And she had invited me to come fly with her one weekend. And so I went out and we flew together. And it sounds really silly, but she was the first female pilot that I knew personally.
Oh, yeah.
And she wasn't even a military pilot. She was a civilian pilot. And it sounds so silly, but I knew there were female pilots out there. I just had never met one. And so I think up until that point, I never saw myself doing it.
Oh, yeah.
And so once I met this friend and I started taking flying lessons, and I realized like, if I'm going to be in the military, like I want to do the cool stuff that you can't do on the outside.
Sure.
You know, there are certain sacrifices involved with serving. You move a lot, you deploy, you know, you obviously have to be told what to wear and how to dress. And it's like, to make some of those things worth it, like you should do something unique and that you can't do outside as a civilian. And to me, what that looked like was trying to cross-train into a job like flying, where I could do kind of like the cool stuff and be like the tip of the spear. So I spoke to my leadership about it, and ultimately what we decided was the best course of action for me was to apply to what's called the Undergraduate Flying Training Board, which is a board that meets for individuals already in the military, so already active duty, that allows them to cross-train to a rated position. So rated meaning pilot, combat systems officers, ABM, or RPA, remotely piloted aircraft. And so I had to wait until the end of my active duty service commitment. I applied to the Undergraduate Flying Training Board, and I got a rated slot. So we're talking about like a 1 to 2 year process to do all this.
What did you have to do for that? Because you're already in the Air Force.
Correct.
And so it's very different. It's not like you have to take the AFOQT and all this other stuff. Like because you're already there. What do you have to do?
So funny enough, I had never taken the AFOQT because I was commissioned through a health profession scholarship, and the AFOQT was a requirement for the flying training board. So I did take the AFOQT. This is normally a test that is taken in ROTC or at the academy, which is why I had never had the opportunity to take it.
Interesting.
Yeah. So I did take the AFOQT. And then I also took, honestly, don't remember what it stands for, Air Force something qualities test. We'll get back to that one. I also had to do what's called the TBAS, which is essentially like a flying aptitude test based on a computer game. And then I had to compile any hours I had towards my private pilot license. I had to provide proof via a logbook of any of the flying time that I had accumulated. And so essentially what the military does is they look at your AFOQT scores, your aptitude tests, and your flying time, and they create a composite score for you. It's called a PICSUM to assess what abilities they think you're going to have to become a pilot, a CISO, an ABM, or an RPA pilot. Oh man, I was going to ask you something. I totally forgot what it was. Did you have to get a class 1 flying physical too? Yes. Okay. Yep. And so the medical side, that's essentially providing the board, like, what are you medically cleared to do? So every rated job will have different flying class requirements. So obviously being a pilot in a manned aircraft is going to have the strictest flying class requirements, that being the flying class 1. And then for other rated positions, the flying class requirements are less restrictive. So you end up going through that process. You your packet goes to the board, and then you get selected. What does that mean? So it was a little bit stressful for me because part of the package involves you getting your chain of command to endorse you, getting your wing commander, so like the installation commander, to endorse you. And I was able to finish my private pilot's license. I finished the day before I was supposed to move to Korea. Oh, wow. So like a lot of things that I was not certain that were going to happen ended up happening. So I was able to get my PPL, I got my wing commander's endorsement in Korea, and my package went through, and I was selected, for a pilot slot. Wow. So I was absolutely ecstatic. Next, what they do is they ask you to rank your preference for the undergraduate pilot training bases. So there are currently 4 bases, and they ask you to provide your preference for where you would like to attend. But there is no guarantee you will get your preferred location. How many hours did you have when you got your private? I think I had around 80. That's good. Yeah. So... Did you ever fly much privately after that? No, partly because in Korea there was not a lot of opportunities to fly recreationally. And then we'll get like a little bit into the story of kind of where my flying career started and kind of how,
Sure.
I guess, how it changed. So
you get your UPT slot, undergraduate pilot training slot. And so like what happens next? Like you're waiting for like a date and then you show up somewhere?
correct. So I returned home to the US after my assignment in Korea. And at that point, I left the biomedical science corps that I was previously assigned to, and I transferred to what's called the line of the Air Force. So the line of the Air Force being all your non-medical chaplain JAG jobs. And then I went to my new base and I started pilot training in Texas.
All right. So you end up going to a base. Which base is that?
So I ended up going to Laughlin in Del Rio, Texas.
And like, what happens there? You show up and you're like, hey, I'm supposed to be here. Like, how does that go?
Yeah. So depending on where you're coming from, so I was already in the military. You might be on a little bit of a waiting period while you wait for class date to start. So you might have just kind of like they call it a casual job or just a temporary job around the base until you start your pilot training class. So we did that for about a month or two. And then I started my pilot training, and then this is kind of where the story gets a little interesting.
Yeah, because now we're going to talk about like you were in pilot training and then, you know, some things happen that we'll go into, and then you end up becoming a combat systems officer.
Yeah.
All right. So let's talk about your pilot training days.
Yeah. So ultimately what happened was I ended up washing out of training. And so what that means for those that aren't familiar with that term is I did not complete the training due to skill deficiency. And this was incredibly like heartbreaking to me. This
Sure.
was something I had felt very certain that I wanted to do. I'd felt like God was calling me to do this. Like all of these situations that ended up working out, like getting my PPL the day before I left, getting a wing commander endorsement. It was like, well, why did all that happen if I was just supposed to wash out of training? And so I think it's also especially challenging when you're sitting in the office with the wing commander who's the one responsible for removing you from training, and kind of them asking you like, you know, is anything going on? Like any family issues? And you're just like, no. And you know, you don't have a reason to provide for your performance. And ultimately the syllabus is set. They can only allow so many extra rides. We're talking about fuel. We're talking about instructors' time. So at some point they have to say, we can't afford to give you any more rides and we have to remove you from training. And so I think it was especially devastating because on paper, I looked like the perfect candidate. You know, I had a great PICSUM, I had a PPL, I had hours, but those did not translate in the aircraft. I was incredibly timid. You know, I lacked like rapid decision making. And so ultimately what happened was I was removed from pilot training, but I was reclassed into combat systems officers training. So I was then moved to a different base to complete that training.
So you had your private, what were you flying then? Was Cessna or like?
Yeah.
Okay. So high wing.
Yeah.
And then when you're in pilot training for the Air Force UPT, you're flying T6 at this point?
Correct.
So now we're talking high performance, complex, very different aircraft. Everything's probably happening so much faster. I've never flown something like that. You know, I've flown Cessnas and, you know, low wings and stuff like that. But, you know, even then it can feel like things are happening very quickly. So I can't imagine like what was the difference between like the Cessna time that you had and then going into the T6. I mean, it had to have just been like, oh my gosh, what's going on? Yeah,
like it is. The entire training is like drinking from a fire hose. And there is some reason for that, right?
Yeah.
Like, again, the intent is to move you through the training in an expedited timeline in order to graduate people that are proficient. And so it was just overwhelming. If you fall behind, that's very likely to snowball, you know? And then we're also talking about adding in like things like formation, like you said, like this is not just civilian flying. This is meant to also help teach you some of the foundations for if you end up going to fighter aircraft and that type of thing. It is a very high-paced challenging environment, and it's for a purpose. Like
Sure.
this is for the best of the best, because these people that graduate are going to be operating multi-million-dollar aircraft.
Yeah. So how you got to fly the T6, what was that like?
It was fun. I think also people kind of underestimate, like there is a physiological adaptation required. And so like some people really struggle with that, like the air sickness, that type of thing. So I would say, I think the T6 flying also helps people identify like what they would want to fly after completing training. You have your fighters, and then you also have your heavy aircraft. So think things like C-130s, C-17s, C-5s, those type of aircraft, tanker aircraft. So
Yeah, I never flew like a constant speed prop. You know what I mean? Everything's always been fixed pitch propeller versus like constant speed prop, because now it's like a whole different component and all that. So it's very, even just thinking about it, you know, I've seen it, but I've never flown one. It would be, and now you add that, plus you got retractable gear and all this other stuff that's going on, and you're, you know, all the different things that could be, I can't even imagine, you know what I mean?
yeah.
So that happens, and like what happens after that?
Yeah. So I think what was really challenging was like to be removed from training, to be removed from your peers, and you're a little bit in a waiting stage about what's happening next. So I think between the time that I was removed from training, I again had the opportunity to express what I would like to do next in my career. I was fortunate that I was told, hey, you have some of the airmanship to continue to be in a flying job. We think you would be better suited for combat systems officers. So I went ahead and applied for that. And about 2 weeks later, I found that I had been accepted for that, and I was able to cross train. And so I attended my survival training, and then I went and moved to NAS Pensacola, which is where the Air Force undergraduate combat systems officers training is.
And what is that? What is a combat systems officer?
Yeah, so you'll hear it referred to as a CISO, and that's kind of an umbrella term that we use, and it can refer to a couple of different positions. So it can refer to being a navigator, a weapons systems officer, or an electronic warfare officer.
Okay.
So you will start combat systems officers training as a cohort, and then you'll eventually split off into these tracks: electronic warfare, navigator, weapon systems. And then those tracks are associated with specific aircraft platforms.
How long was the combat systems officer school?
It's about a year.
Oh, wow. Okay.
Yeah.
And is this happening? I'm assuming there's like book work, but are you in planes at this time too? Because you're going to be on some type of platform in the future, or?
Yeah. So the training is very much in parallel with undergraduate pilot training. So think academic phase, sim phase, a T6 aircraft phase, and then a T1 aircraft phase. So they very much parallel each other, and I was at an advantage. I'd already had a lot of the T6 academics and experience, and so that helped kind of expedite my training, because this was my second time seeing some of that material.
T1 is that?
T1 is a trainer aircraft.
Oh, okay.
And so the CISO training and pilot training will use that to train individuals going to heavy aircraft.
Is the T1 the kind of like the Learjet looking one?
Yes.
Okay.
It's a Beechcraft.
Okay.
Yeah.
So you're there for a year. How difficult was that?
So for me, it wasn't as difficult, because like I said, my second go at a lot of this, which in some ways was good. Like I felt like I was able to help people in my class, help them maybe understand things in ways that they couldn't. But also just in general, I would say CISO training is more relaxed than pilot training. And pilot training, again, fire hose. There is an intent to weed you out, but again, they want the best of the best graduating the program. You're often working 12 hours a day in pilot training. CISO training, it is challenging, don't get me wrong, but there is a little bit more flexibility in the schedule, a little bit more like relaxed feel.
How far into UPT were you?
I was about just under halfway.
Oh, wow. So you had,
Yeah.
How many hours did you get in the T6?
I don't know. I think it was somewhere around 50 or 60.
Yeah.
Yeah. So
that's still hard to deal with.
Well, I remember you asked the question, like, what do you do for flying now? And I think, to be honest, like, after that experience with pilot training, I was just really nervous or didn't want to get back into flying because I had that like fear of failure like around me. And I even noticed that when I was going through CISO training, I was obviously doing very well because I had flown this aircraft before, and I was constantly told by my instructors, like, you should consider being a weapons systems officer on like a Strike Eagle. But I knew that was a very like challenging track, and I was afraid of washing out again. Like I was afraid like I couldn't go through that process again. And so I ended up selecting the EWO track, which stands for Electronic Warfare Officer track, because that track was a little bit less intense. And I knew, I was like, I can definitely graduate from this track.
Sure.
So I think I was a little bit haunted by this like fear of failure.
Yeah. I can only imagine.
Yeah. So I never really like regained my passion for general aviation just because it felt like I wasn't good enough or I wasn't meant to do this. And that's not to say I won't like ever fly GA again, but I've also realized like when you do have the opportunity to fly for work, my time outside of work is spent doing other things not necessarily related to aviation.
Yeah.
So
yeah, I had to get my biannual flight review like a year and a half ago, and it had been years since I had flown, and I couldn't believe like how like it, you know things. It's not like riding a bike though, you know what I mean? Like you have to be doing these things.
They're perishable
to stay proficient.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Like, and it was just shocking. So I can only imagine, you know what I mean? Like when you're in that type of environment and everything is like bam, bam, you know what I mean? Like you have to meet these marks and all this other stuff. And yeah, I can only imagine what that would be like.
I think it's also hard because you feel like a failure in these instances. But when you take a step back and you realize, you know, I'm still a rated officer in the United States Air Force doing what 0.01% of the population do. Like I'm doing pretty well for myself.
Yeah, sure.
But being in these training pipelines, it's almost like, you know, a microcosm, and you're competing with the best of the best.
Yeah.
And so when you are not the best, you feel like bottom of the barrel, and that's not true. Like you are extremely talented and you have gifts. You're just so focused on your failures, you can't really see your gifts anymore.
Well, and it's like, you know, it's like, it's easy to say, you know, like, I mean, it is like your life is great and everything like that, but you still have your feelings about how things went, you know what I mean? And like, I'm saying that because like I interviewed Keith, who's an A-10 pilot, and he tried to get on the F-35 program, but he couldn't pass the centrifuge requirement. You know what I mean? And it's like, but you know, somebody told him, hey, you're just lucky you get to do all this. And yeah, that's true. But you know, he still has his thing, you know what I mean? It's like, he doesn't get to be excluded from feeling that because he's lucky enough to go fly A-10s. You know what I mean? It's still like, so I can totally understand that. I remember telling Keith, I was like, dude, but yeah, I mean, I get that. But yeah, I mean, like, it's still a letdown for you. You know what I mean? It's like, yeah, it's great that you get to go fly A-10s every day. But if your aspiration is to move on, you know, to progress because the A-10 is getting phased out, you know, and if you don't get that, then what? Yeah. You know, so it's, yeah, I can try to understand that. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
So you're in school for a year, you get through it, and are you on the T1 while you're doing that?
Yeah. The last flying phase of training is on the T1.
And then what happens after that? Is there like you get selected for a certain aircraft or how does that go when you get out?
Yep. So again, like I'd mentioned, I elected to go the electronic warfare officer route. And so what that meant for me was I was eligible for 3 different aircraft. I could either be assigned to an RC-135 based out of Omaha, Nebraska, a B-52 in North Dakota or Louisiana, or the EC-130 based out of Tucson, Arizona. And part of it, kind of like going back to what we talked about earlier, when you're young and you don't necessarily know what kind of like career you want, and you're just kind of like going off what people tell you. It's a little bit how it was like for me. Like I had gone to this career fair and I had gotten to talk to these RC-135 crew members, and I was dead set that I was going to be on an RC-135. I was like, this isn't the plane for me. I was like looking up CrossFit gyms in Omaha, Nebraska. I was so excited that that plane had a real toilet. Like I was like, this is what I want. And then I was like, if I don't get this, I want to be on the B-52. So 8-engine bomber. And I was just very dead set. Like those were my top two choices.
Yeah.
My flight commander in training, he was like, are you sure you don't want to put the EC-130 higher? And I was like, no, I want RC-135, then the B-52, then the EC-130. And so they do a drop night. That's the day that you find out what aircraft.
That,
yeah. So you'll hear it referred to as a drop night. And typically these are a party, there's family members, there's food, there's typically alcohol. My drop happened during COVID. So my classmates and I were in like outdoor brewery. We had a computer screen, and then our commanders revealed our aircraft via a slideshow on Zoom. So we were still able to celebrate. But I remember when they got to my name, and the next slide, an EC-130 popped up. And I thought it was a joke because I was the class leader. And I'm like, clearly they're like pulling a prank on me or something. And I was like, wait, this isn't a joke. And they were like, no. And I was absolutely devastated. I was like crying because I just had never considered that as an option for me. I was so dead set that I was going to be on the RC-135. And it was just, I remember going home that night and literally just like crying in my bed.
Wow.
Which is kind of funny looking back.
So you wanted the RC-135, but you got picked for something else?
Correct. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
You got the C-130?
Yep.
Does it have a bathroom?
It has
kind of
like a portable chemical toilet that's strapped to the side. So yes, it is. It does have a toilet.
I don't know why I cannot think of what an RC-135 looks like.
They have the black noses, so you'll hear them referred to as like the Snoopy looking jets. Yeah. So, and they're in ISR, so intelligence, reconnaissance, surveillance aircraft.
Is it kind of like a AWACS or something like that?
Similar.
Okay.
Yeah.
I know what you're talking about now.
Yeah.
So it's pretty big.
Yeah.
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 All right. So you get C-130. It's not what you wanted, but you're still in that life. All right. So what happens after that?
So essentially, the military being the small world that it is, I tell my family members, I tell a couple of my mentors, and then randomly out of the blue, I get a call from a guy I went to high school with, named Caleb, who had gone to the Air Force Academy. We had lost touch. He calls me during this 10-year period. He has become an EC-130 pilot. And he was like, hey, I heard the news. You got EC-130s. How pumped are you? And I was like, Caleb, I'm devastated. And he was like, why? He was like, your life is about to get so amazing.
Nice.
And he was able to tell me all these cool things that I was about to do that I didn't have any idea. Like I'd never really taken the time to do the research on the aircraft. And I realized like, I got really lucky. Like this was like the best option for me as an electronic warfare officer to end up on this aircraft. But it was like, I didn't even know it.
Yeah.
And it took me talking to individuals from that platform to better understand the mission, to understand the lifestyle, the deployments. And I was like, wow, like this is awesome. Like, how did I not know this earlier?
So this is interesting that you're saying this because, and this is not related, but related in the sense that like this podcast, a big reason for it is to get people to start talking to people about what they want to do. Right.
Yeah.
And not that you would have known to at that time, but anybody listening, it's like, okay, well, you never know. Like something that you're not considering could end up being the greatest thing.
For sure.
And you're only going to know that if you're talking to people in these different areas. You know what I mean? Even if it's one you're kind of like on the fence about, it's like you should still ask because you just don't know, For
sure. And it's like you talked about, like I will always have that disappointment from not completing pilot training.
Yeah.
But in some ways, having the opportunity to become a CISO, like, again, it's not anything I would have considered for myself.
Totally.
If I had been offered a CISO slot while I was in Korea when I initially applied, I probably would have told the Air Force thank you, but no thank you. I
Yeah.
wanted a pilot slot. I'm not interested. And I would have closed that door and separated from the military.
Yeah.
But instead, I had to go the painful route. I went through pilot training. I washed out. I got reclassed as a CISO. And I was forced to pursue this new career field that ended up being a much better fit for me.
Nice.
And it was the same way with this aircraft. And I think I felt upset on my drop night because I was like, first I didn't get to go through pilot training, and now I'm getting an aircraft I didn't want. But it was like all things I would have never picked for myself really ended up being a better option for me.
I know I told you about this earlier, but like for when I applied for all this stuff, it was like pilot or nothing.
Yeah.
Nothing else. And there were so many other things that I could have done, you know, and I could have, you know, had that lifestyle, you know, that I had wanted, but it was just not a thought in my mind. You know what I mean? So it's really great advice to like explore all these other things because you just don't know.
For sure. Like I would say that being a CISO is probably one of the best kept secrets of the Air Force, simply because you are an aircrew member. You are qualified on an aircraft. You work with other crew members. You develop discipline, airmanship. You learn about safety. Like you are just as much a crew member on that plane as the pilot. And so for anyone who has never heard of it or considered it, it's definitely something worth looking into. And we talked a little bit about this. Becoming a CISO, for me, I was a pilot that became a CISO. It can also work the other way. You can become a CISO and attempt to apply to pilot training. Again, there's an application process, recommendations, etc. But getting experience as a CISO will set you up very well if you do want to apply to pilot training in the future.
I would imagine it would be really cool because you're flying in the plane. I mean, you get to go flying every day, you know, or however many times you go fly a week. You know what I mean? It's still amazing. You know what I mean? I would love to. I always see these videos and pictures of people hanging off, you know, the bay doors down, and you're sitting there and looking out the back, and I can only imagine. I mean, that would be just incredible.
I think also like I feel in my job, I understand the military. I can speak intelligently about like what the goals of the Air Force and like the bigger military are. And that's often really hard to do in some of these other career fields where you're a support asset. But when you're actually the one executing the mission and you're like operational, whether you're a CISO pilot or a linguist on the aircraft, you understand things so much more.
What is it? What does like a day look like? Like how many times are you flying a week, or is it like that? You know what I mean? Am I asking that question right? Is it like, are you flying every day, or is it, you know, what does a typical week look like as a?
So I would say a typical week looks like one flight a week and then one simulator event during a week. So a simulator is an opportunity to practice flying skills, but without the gas bill and the time commitment. So we will have ground-based trainers to accomplish some of our flying training requirements.
When you guys go out to fly, like how long are each one of these flights?
It depends, but 6 hours is about the average duration. Yeah.
Now, how many people are on that aircraft?
Yeah. So the specific variant that we are on, it is an EC-130H model. So this is a C-130 that's been modified for electronic attack. So when you hear the word electronic attack, think about disrupting communication networks. So we're talking about jamming radios, radars, anything that an enemy would use to gain awareness on U.S. aircraft or forces or that type of thing. So we want to attempt to disrupt enemy communication networks in order to protect U.S. aircraft and personnel. So our EC-130 is composed of a flight deck of 2 pilots, an aircraft commander, a co-pilot, a navigator, and then a flight engineer. And then our mission compartment with all of our jamming equipment that has different consoles. So you will have 2 electronic warfare officers, and then you'll have linguists. So we will carry linguists that can monitor enemy communications and be able to understand them based on the language that is being spoken. And then we'll have an airborne maintenance technician to help us like troubleshoot any of our equipment. And then we'll also have a mission crew supervisor who is overseeing the work of the linguists. So
somebody that would be curious about this job not going the health route that you did, what would be that? Let's say that somebody's in high school, they would have to get a 4-year degree, but then what would they want to do after that?
So most people, if you have identified an like early inclination to serve, the most direct or surefire way to enter the military would be to attend a military academy, such as the Air Force Academy. But you can attend other service academies and still commission into the Air Force. And then things like ROTC, so Reserve Officer Training Corps, like serving, or which is at different detachments within universities. And then lastly, you could be what's considered a direct accession. So you could have graduated college, you could be a civilian in the civilian workforce, and then contact a recruiter asking to commission.
Okay.
So those would be the routes. And kind of like we've talked about, typically ROTC and Air Force Academy graduates, they are being vectored for these flying jobs. So they are typically going to be prioritized and, again, vectored for these.
Yeah. So what is a typical, like, so you're flying once a week, you're doing sim time as well. Like, what's happening like during the rest of the week?
Yeah. So prior to our missions, we have to mission plan. So we'll spend an afternoon mission planning. Typically what we're doing for home station training is we're recreating a scenario, or a mission that we would do deployed. So we're using local airspace, to come up with essentially like a mock threat country and creating a scenario, whether we're protecting other fighter aircraft, protecting troops on the ground, protecting maritime vessels, and we'll recreate a scenario that we're going to execute in local airspace.
Okay. So is it kind of like everything is kind of revolving around whatever mission you're going to be doing next type thing?
Correct. Yeah.
So how many years have you been in the Air Force now?
I have been in for 10 years.
And what's your plan moving forward?
It's a little bit of a unique time. Our C-130s are in the process of retiring, and we'll be getting a new aircraft online, the Gulfstream 550. So I have the option to stay in the military and become qualified on a new aircraft. There are options to serve in the Guard or Reserves. And then, after an active duty service commitment, which I did incur one for CISO training, I incurred a 6-year commitment. You have the opportunity to separate. So kind of just like assessing where do my personal and professional goals fall within that, balancing desires to want to have a family with military commitments. Those are all very challenging.
How has your time been in the Air Force? Like, what are the pros?
I would say the pros are definitely the people. You make some amazing connections with people because it's just like with anything, like you connect with people that have gone through these really extenuating circumstances and you can't help but to bond with them. And so, when you deploy, when you PCS, when you TDY, you tend to make friends quickly, and these friendships tend to last for lifetimes.
Yeah.
So by far the people and by far the experiences, I would have never moved to Korea on my own, but being forced to move there really helped kind of expose me to a culture I wouldn't necessarily have sought after myself. So I would say like people and the ability to have new experiences would be the pros.
And you've been deployed a few times. How has that been?
I've been deployed 3 times now. They've all been very unique experiences. I've deployed twice in flying positions, and then I've deployed once as a detachment commander, so kind of overseeing operations. So every deployment is unique with the pace, with the mission, with the location. But I would say they're very busy, but you bond with people. That is your family for the next 3 to 4 months, and you're with those people maybe 18 hours a day. You're flying 12-hour missions with them, and so you naturally become very close.
What are some things that you would tell someone to think about that's considering a career in the Air Force as an officer?
I would say if you are certain, or as certain as you can be, looking into doing something like ROTC or the academy would be the surest ways. But like there is the option to enter the military as a direct accession. I would also say if you do not get your first choice, like have an open mind to what you are given in terms of your career. And it sounds super cheesy, the whole like bloom where you're planted, but if you can show your leadership, you're willing to embrace the task that you've been given. Yeah. When you approach them later and say, hey, I'm looking to cross train, they're going to say, yes, like you have proven you can be like responsible for the tasks that we've given you here. And like, we want to see you do more things in a different career field. And so like, don't be discouraged if what you first get isn't what you want. There are pathways, there are doors that can be opened to get you to where you want to go.
How do you think the statement, having a backup plan, would apply?
I would say you do want to have a backup plan. And with that, like, be open-minded, like kind of like what we were talking about earlier. Having all your eggs in the I must have a pilot slot basket. So the backup plan in this scenario would be open-minded to other rated slots. So air battle managers, remotely piloted aircraft, combat systems officers. So when you're having that backup plan, like you need to be open-minded because who knows where those not planned paths could take you. Yeah.
Yeah. No, when you were talking about, going from, backseat or something like to like a pilot position, going that route, it's like, I didn't know that at that time, but like looking back, it's like, yeah, that would have been a no brainer.
Yeah.
So I think that's really good advice. You sent us some pictures.
Oh, yes.
Yeah. You want to talk about those pictures?
Yeah, let's talk about the pictures.
Yeah. So, once those are up, all right, so we have a you and a coach shirt right there. What's this all about?
So I do coach CrossFit on the weekends at Iron Grip CrossFit. And this is just kind of like we talked about, one of those things where it's like, I would have never picked this. I got this job totally by coincidence. The owner of the gym I attended as a member was looking for coaches and didn't have a level 1, decided, okay, like no one's ever asked me to coach, but I think I want to do this. Got my level 1 with you. We attended the same level 1 class. Yeah. So I've been coaching for almost 4 years now, and it's just been like an incredible opportunity. It's crazy because my ability to coach and instruct, it ties in so much to what I do. Like I'm an instructor, electronic warfare officer. And so it's crazy. My skills at work help me be a better coach. My coaching skills help me be a better briefer at work. So,
and you coach on the busiest day of the week, Saturday.
Yeah. The crazy big class.
Yeah.
So.
I mean, coaching CrossFit is fun. So if anybody's, this is a side note, if you're considering coaching CrossFit, it is fun. It's very rewarding. And, yeah, it's pretty cool. I would have never imagined that I would be coaching CrossFit either.
Yeah.
Yeah. That's a really good picture of you.
So these pictures, they were looking for people. They were trying to update these posters at work, and I was like, I want to be a model and stuff. But I like this picture, as cheesy as it is, because it really does go back to like the whole, if you don't see someone that looks like you doing what you want to do, like you may never consider it. Yeah. And so I am a big advocate of talking to young women about serving in career fields that they may not have considered, like aviation. Like I have a huge passion for that. Because to me that is so important. And so I'm always happy to talk to younger females who are interested in the military and serving and want to know what it's like. Cause I always love seeing more women have these opportunities. So I hope some little girl sees that picture and is like, wow, like I've never thought of like being an aircrew member. I want to be like that.
That's super cool.
Yeah. So these are the planes. So these are the EC-130s out on the ramp. So that was taken during monsoon season here in Tucson.
Oh, that's here?
Yep.
Yeah, that's a super cool picture.
Yeah. So it just had a huge monsoon. We were waiting on the storms to pass before we could fly. And we got that photo. Yeah, this was just another one I threw in there with some ladies. So another like passion of mine is addressing specifically barriers to females serving. in the military. So this was taken at one of those conferences. So we're talking about anything from a uniform not fitting correctly to how do we support pregnant service members. So kind of trying to dissect those unique issues to females, and then also looking more broadly at families. Again, recognizing people are our biggest asset. How do we recruit and retain these individuals so that we can keep diverse talent in the military?
Where is this at? Is this like at training or?
This was at Wright-Patterson Air Force Base. And so this particular conference, we were looking at female uniforms and modifications that could be made to make them more user-friendly in flight, specifically for things like bladder relief.
Oh, okay.
Also examining things like body armor, acknowledging that a lot of these gear are based around male measurements and not female measurements.
Sure.
So attempting to make them more fitting for the female body.
So a little bit tighter in the waist, because normally they look very just straight down.
Yeah.
You know
So
what I mean?
think like more fabric in the chest, more fabric in the hips, and that type of thing. Zipper placement, females that need to relieve their bladder in a fighter jet that don't have the opportunity.
Interesting.
Coming up with devices that work well for them.
Yeah.
Yeah. So again, things you don't really think about.
Yeah.
But these can really be barriers to women that serve. Yeah. So this is a photo of a friend of mine who was stationed with me at Tyndall, and that's really been a great mentor to me. And we had the opportunity to go on vacation to Hawaii. And I picked that photo because I think Hawaii would be my place. Like if I could live anywhere, it would be Hawaii. I love the weather, the mountains, the beach, the food, and that's like my go-to.
Is she one of the ones in the one with the picture we just were at?
No, this is a separate friend.
Okay.
Yeah.
It's crazy how similar that they look.
Yeah. And this is probably like my proudest hike I ever did.
Really?
This is Humphreys Peak.
Where's that at?
This is in Flagstaff, Arizona.
Oh, okay. I didn't know that.
So it's the tallest peak in Arizona.
Really?
Yeah. So I did this one 2 years ago.
How high is it?
It's 12,000 feet.
That's high.
Yeah. So I think the starting elevation is 7,000 feet. So
how long did it? So almost 5,000 feet of climb. Like how long did that take?
it took me about 3 hours, 3.5 hours up, 3.5 hours down.
Wow.
Yeah.
Sometimes it's harder to go down. Was it harder to go down or up?
It was hard to go down because my cell phone died and I got lost on the trail.
Oh, you're by yourself?
I was by myself.
Oh,
do not do that.
Yeah.
But I found my way back down.
Did you start early in the morning so you knew you'd hopefully be back by sun going down?
I started at 10:30 when it had warmed up a little bit.
Okay.
And then I was back down by about like 5:30 or 6.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right. And this is, okay. So then this is like a side note question too. Like, so like over 12,000 feet, I remember at some point you have to have supplemental oxygen. You know what I mean? Do you remember that?
Yeah.
What is that?
I know what you're talking about. That's like specifically for aviation. For hiking, I was fine.
For aviation, like, are you guys wearing, do you have to have oxygen when you're flying sometimes?
Yes.
Okay.
So, again, it's like related to like pressurization and altitude. So we can have the aircraft pressurized so that we are not within the cabin. We're not above 10,000 feet.
Got it. Okay.
Yeah.
All right. Well, thanks for sharing those pictures, Michelle. Yeah,
You're
they're
welcome.
really, really good pictures. You said something earlier about messaging to young girls. All right. So what would you tell a young girl if she was listening to this, or if you were going to talk to her?
It sounds so cheesy, but I would just tell them like be who you want to be, do what you want to do. Don't let like culture tell you a job isn't fit for you. Like you have to decide that for yourself. Again, I wish I'd known about aviation earlier. It was something that never came up, but I don't want females to think they're any different because of their gender. Like just know your work ethic, your diligence, like that's what is going to take you where you want to go. You're not going to be limited by your gender.
What would have changed if you would have known about aviation earlier?
I think I would have like considered it at a younger age. Again, I thought about doing ROTC, but not seriously enough. But to be honest, I'd never even considered the thought that I could fly an aircraft.
Yeah.
I'd never like had that thought. And I also think a lot of females could potentially be lacking confidence in pursuing some of these activities because it's not something they generally grow up exposed to. So if we can maybe get females in aviation at a younger age, flying a Cessna, expose them to it earlier to help them identify like where their interests are, and that type of thing. It's similar to what we see in sports. You know, sports build confidence for females, and same thing with things like aviation. Getting them exposed to it earlier will help them build confidence in pursuing those types of careers.
So then, young ladies out there, if you don't see anybody doing the thing that you kind of got swirling around in your mind, that doesn't mean that there's not. There probably is, and you should maybe seek that. It means
you get to be the first one to do it.
Or, yeah, you could be the first one.
Yeah, it means you get to pave the way for the future females.
So look for somebody to see if there is, and if there is, talk to that person, and if not, then you get to pave the way.
Exactly.
That's a good message.
Yeah.
Any other things like regrets wise that you would say, like, hope somebody would learn from?
I think if we just dig a little bit more into like kind of why I initially settled on optometry, I think I picked that career out of rational reasons. You know, I wanted to make a certain amount of money when I graduated from my program. I wanted the flexibility to work part-time if I had children, or work in a commercial setting if I left the military. But at the end of the day, like, those practical reasons will not sustain you.
Yeah.
You know, when you're in the grind, when you're staying till 6 p.m. working on charts, like, you have to have passion to drive you. So for me, identifying that my passion was lacking was when I had that moment, like, I need to leave this career field. I cannot do this for 20 years. And so it's tough though, because you may have parents that grew up in a family where they were not financially stable and they want you to be financially stable. So sometimes there's pressure from parents to pursue things that are stable or practical, even if that's not where your passion lies. And so, you know, you kind of have to be able to identify, hey, this isn't where my passion is, or I need to experience more opportunities before I settle on something. I'm not quite sure how I can make that passion and practicality match yet.
It's so crazy how much I can relate to things that you've been through. Because, you know, it's like my decision to become a lawyer was very similar in the sense that I had never considered it. And then at some point down the road, I'm like, you know, I didn't maximize my potential through this career choice. You know what I mean? And so it's like exploring all of the different options that are out there. And, you know, just like what you were just saying, I mean, it made complete sense to me when I made the choice. But looking back, I can see why it made complete sense and how it didn't make complete sense at the same time. You know what I mean? So you really got to put time into those decisions and thought into those decisions and gathering information and talking to people and things like that.
It can also be hard when you feel like you've spent a certain amount of time and money invested in a career field. So I was lucky that I had some of my schooling paid off. And so I wasn't in financial debt because of my school loans. So I financially was in a place where I could cross train, but it's hard because I still had people asking me, well, you've spent 8 years of your life studying to become an optometrist. You're going to throw all of that away to do something else. And it's hard to quantify happiness in this. You know, you can't put a price on happiness. And so if something makes you happier, like, you may have to lose out on that time investment. And again, these are all things people may not understand based on their personal experience, but you have to do what's best for you, you know?
Well, it's easy for somebody to say that's literally just someone in your life that hasn't been through everything that you've done. You know what I mean? Like, hasn't gone through all the experiences and hasn't dealt with the day to day in the thing that you're not really liking. And yeah, it's true that I did spend 8 years, but you know, the flip side is I could spend another 8 years and not be happy with any of this. For what? You know what I mean? Because somebody said, well, you spent all these 8 years. Well, it's like, okay, well, I mean, yeah, that's a true statement. However, I want to do something else with the next 8 years of my life.
For sure. And I think in some ways that was an advantage to me. I went through these training pipelines older.
Yeah.
I was a bit more mature and seasoned. I had a bit more perspective, especially, you know, after washing out of a pipeline, I kind of knew, okay, what's important and what's not. And so although I went the scenic route and it took me longer to get where I need to go, like I wouldn't necessarily trade those 8 years. Like I grew in those 8 years. I needed to have gone through grad school. I needed to have had those first 3 to 4 years in the military. Because at the end of the day, I had maturity and experience that other people didn't. And that was valuable.
So what do you think about this? Like, so this brings up another topic, and we'll kind of end it on this, is like a lot of people feel stuck in the place where they're at job wise. You know what I mean? Not too many people unfortunately get to live their dream. You know what I mean? And so we kind of just end up where we end up, not just by chance, but you know, we make decisions, but sometimes we get to a point where we make that decision. And it's like, you know, I probably could have made a better decision. And it's like, but then there's this sense of like fear or uncertainty. So we stay in that place. And one of the messages that I, you know, want to have for people is to, you know, at least start exploring other options and talking to other people, because that could be that motivation to get you to take that next step, to get out of that rut or whatever it is that you're feeling. Like, what's your input on something like that?
I 1,000% agree. Like when I was first having the consideration of leaving optometry, there were some mixed reactions. My initial supervisor was not incredibly supportive. But some of my higher up supervisors, who were talking about colonels and above, they were ecstatic. They were not at all offended. They thought it was awesome. They're like, you will bring such a unique perspective to your new community, having a medical background. And they saw like that value in cross training. And so like you're saying, you may need to just talk to a couple people to help you see kind of what is the value in leaving what you're currently doing to pursue something else. And it, you know, there are financial implications. I understand that. My situation was a bit unique, but I agree. Like talking to other people, also not feeling the need to rush. Like I think we can agree. Like for me, I didn't start doing what I'm doing until I was 31. Like, you know, it took me, 14 years to figure out what I wanted to do with my life. So there is no rush.
Well, that's the other thing too, is like not being any rush. Just because you're looking into it, you're not obligating anything, but you can at least start formulating a plan.
Exactly.
You know, that could, maybe it takes 3-4 years. That's fine. But if you don't start, you're going to be 3 or 4 years behind when you get 3 or 4 years ahead. You know what I mean? So it's like, if, you know, the sooner you can start and start building that plan, and to like, you know, a day that you're going to start like initiating that plan and things like that, you know, you won't have to do that down the road if you have already done it.
Yeah. And in my case, I found out what I didn't enjoy or what I wasn't good at before I found out what I was more designed to do. And so again, that can be incredibly frustrating to be unsatisfied in a job or feel like an opportunity was taken away. But that's part of discovering like what you're meant to do, is figuring out what you're not meant to do as well. Cool.
Well, Michelle, thank you for coming today. Thanks for all the great advice and the stories and everything.
Thank you for having me. This was fun.
Yeah, for sure. Everybody, I hope you enjoyed this episode with Michelle. If you have any questions for Michelle, please let me know. Write them in the comments and I will ask her and I'll respond. And just thanks for joining. Bye.